she taught Native American literature as part of her curriculum. Which was, even I hadn't encountered it at that point because they didn't do that in the Oklahoma public schools. So she asked my sister and I to do a presentation about being Native American to some of her classes. And at the time, I was really grappling with my own Native identity because people were they knew what being Indian was about, and I was like, I didn't live up to any of that because it's a misconception. But I wasn't confident in that in myself. So, yeah. At the time I was sort of like, does that mean what does that mean?
Welcome to the Whole Student Podcast with Cal Balavin. Whole Student refers to the magical moment when a student is fully seen, heard, and known. This is the spark of a relationship between a student and teacher, where the former is catalyzed on a journey beyond what they thought possible, and the latter is a proud advisor cheering from the sidelines. The Whole Student Podcast asks guests to reflect back to their moment, to the person who became a transformative teacher in their lives, and on the journey they were set upon. Our guest today is Emily Bowen Cohen. Emily is a graphic novelist and the creator of a memoir-style comic, from her perspective being Native American and Jewish, titled An American Indian Guide to the Day of Atonement. A Harvard graduate, she was an inquiry fellow at the American Jewish University, and in 2016, she won a Word Grant, a project of American Jewish University's Institute for Jewish Creativity. That helped her leverage her artwork and experience growing up in rural Oklahoma to create curriculum for audiences from elementary school children to college students, educating them about diversity. You can learn more about Emily and her work on her website, memberof2tribes.com. Emily, thank you for joining us on The Whole Student.
Thank you. That was such a nice introduction. Can I do a quick plug?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. In 2023, HarperCollins is going to be publishing my graphic novel called Two Tribes. So,
Stop it. I love it.
Yes.
And you can't see it here. I'm a big graphic novel fan, and I have, you can't see with the backdrop here, but if you see my library, you're like, oh my goodness, he has everything. It's like you're at a Comic-Con convention, you're like,
I love that. I love that. Well, after it comes out, I'd love to come back.
Yeah. Oh, I love. We love to have you as a guest. Oh, awesome. Well, here at the Whole Student, we want to start off with people being able to visualize who you were as a student. So what words would you describe yourself as a young person in classes?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, I was meek. I was afraid of authority, I think, or respectful, I guess would be sort of a better way to put it.
Okay.
But I was certainly a rule follower in that way.
Okay.
So I think at the same time, though, I was certainly curious. So the combination of the two pushed me to be very scholarly, and because I always wanted to give the right answer. So I would do a lot of research. The one area where I sort of felt confident and I got a lot of good feedback, I guess, was my drawing. So I was creative, and I would incorporate that a lot into my work.
That's awesome. Yeah. You sound like a wonderful student, and so
teachers like me.
Take us. Yeah. So this might be a hard one for you because when I ask people this question, they're searching for that one student, that one moment, but you might have many. What was the moment where you felt seen, heard, and known? What was that stage where you felt like, you know me, you see me?
Yeah. Well, so I will say that teacher was Dr. Bernadette Anand, my high school English teacher in Montclair, New Jersey. Okay. And so to explain this, a little bit of backstory. My father, who's Native American, he died when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
And we were then, so I was little, and we were at the time living in Oklahoma. And a few years after his death, we moved to New Jersey, which is where my mom, who's Jewish, was from. And so it was culture shock, I moved from Oklahoma, where everyone is either Indian themselves or related to someone or works with Native American people.
Wow.
I mean, everyone in Oklahoma encounters Native people.
Wow.
But in my New Jersey public school, my sisters and I, we were the we were the only Native American students.
Wow.
And most people had never even met a Native person.
Wow.
And so, I know. So we had all these misconceptions about what it meant to be a Native American. And like they assumed we rode horses and we lived in teepees. Like really, it was basically their version, their version of being a Native American person was really historical.
Wow.
Okay, so Dr. Anand, she taught Native American literature as part of her curriculum.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, which was, even I hadn't encountered it at that point because they didn't do that in the Oklahoma public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So she asked my sister and I to do a presentation about being Native American to some of her classes.
Okay.
And at the time, I was really grappling with my own Native identity because people were they knew what being Indian was about. And I was like, I didn't live up to any of that because it's a misconception. But I wasn't confident in that in myself.
Wow,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So, at the time I was sort of like, does that mean what does that mean? But Dr. Anand, asking us to tell our story, it validated that like my own story, even though it was different from what people expected, was truthful in itself.
Wow.
But I'd say part of the real beauty of her request was also that it forced me to talk to my mom about my father.
Wow.
It had been a bunch of years since he had died, and we were really in the fog of grief, and she didn't want to talk about him, and she had cut out a lot of ties with his side of the family. So we didn't ask questions about him. And again, I'm a rule follower. So this was homework, this was for school. Wow. So I had to sit down with my mom and have a conversation with her that like I had been afraid to have, and so it was really great to see that I could talk about him and, my identity as a Native American person. And, and it was okay. It was a difficult conversation, but we could have it. Yeah. So by asking me to tell this story in front of a group of people, Dr. Anand really started me on a journey that like I continue to this day, by drawing these comics and writing stories. I want to communicate what it means to be an Indigenous person in the United States. So it was pretty powerful.
I mean, we wouldn't have your gifts of sharing that voice and that story without Dr. Anand. And Dr. Anand also helped you to heal, right? Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like she must have known. I was like, how did she get me? I don't, but
well, I could ask. Where's Dr. Anand now? Yeah. What's your relationship with her? And
gosh, she's gone on to do a lot of great things. I think she went on to make her own school, and I know she's won a couple Fulbright scholarships to do the kind of the work that you guys are doing. Creating schools that value students in all their wonderful diversity. And we were in contact on Facebook. She sent me a shout out. I had the opportunity to meet Joy Harjo, who's Muskogee Creek as I am, and also the Poet Laureate of the United States. Yeah, and I took a picture with her. And she gave me a little shout out. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, Dr. Anand still looking out.
Yeah, it's awesome that you're still connected, and it speaks to the power of the teacher. And I heard a story from you recently, one that moved me, and I'd say moved me to tears, because sometimes you have the Dr. Anand in your life, but you also have adults in the educational spaces that sometimes don't have the same kind of impact, the contrasting impact, really. Could you talk a little bit about that? Tell the story.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it also speaks to partly why I was a meek student, And I say meek on purpose because it's not, I wasn't shy. I was afraid, I think, which I'm still working on. But it was my first school experience. I was in elementary school, and my father, who was alive at the time, we were living in Oklahoma, and he was a doctor at the tribal hospital where we lived. My elementary school was right across the street from his hospital, so I could see it from the front steps. And the town where I lived was really racially divided. There were Native Americans, and there were white settlers, and they were sort of had always been there from the time that the town had begun in like 1850 or whatever. So my principal was a white man, sort of part of the, backbone of the structure of the town. And so he would stand out in front of the school in the morning and wave to students as we came in and say hello. And so this one day I was 5 years old at kindergarten, and I saw all these kids gathered around him, like jumping up and down. And he was so I went over to go see what was going on. And he was doing a magic trick where he was like pulling nickels out of kids' ears, and everyone was super excited, gathering around. And I was, I wanted to have that. So I ran up to him and tugged on his hand, I want to turn. And he looked at me like school principal, right? God. And like a tall guy. So I was looking up at him, and he was like, when he saw me, his look turned kind of mean, and which I didn't understand. And he said, you don't get a turn. Doesn't your dad make enough money at that hospital over there? So, in my lifetime, I'm sort of trying to decipher this moment in my life. I've come to understand that there was like a lot of politics going on, and they had given whatever. At the time, it was the 80s. They were giving money to Native American things. People weren't happy about it. It was upsetting the structure of the town. But as a 5-year-old, I just knew my principal, this authority figure in my life, didn't think I deserved the same magic that other students did. And it was something that I carried around with me for a long time.
I mean, you describe yourself as being meek, and here's a moment that really is a trigger for it. Wow.
It's just like a real, I really don't think I understood until much later what an impact that moment had. And,
tremendous
for the rest of my life.
Tremendous. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a question I ask guests on the show, and it's one that's gotten different types of responses, and I really want you to take us through those people that have inspired you. But the question is, the idea is to inspire others with the folks that have impacted you the most. And so, if I gave you a magic wand, and you could invite 5 teachers in your life to a meal with you, who would they be? And, walk us through when you met them and in your life. And Dr. Anand might be there, might not. It's your choice, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I'd love it if she would come.
Yeah.
My school principal, he doesn't get to go. This is going to be all positive.
That's right.
It's going to be a good party.
That's right. Okay. All right.
Okay. So I'd say, Mr. T, my elementary music teacher in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm dating myself, but Mr. T was an African-American man. And at the time there was the program, the A-Team.
That's right.
with the tough Mr. T. And so that's what we called him that. And he was tough like Mr. T. And he taught art and music.
Wow. That's awesome.
Amazing. And he made us take, you had to know where those keys were on the piano. Like you had to take it as seriously as you took any other class. And so for me, that was really great because I'm artistic, and it really instilled in me a lifelong respect for the arts, and also like a real commitment to technique, because that's where he was always wanted us to know the foundations of this stuff.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
All right.
All right. Number 2. So I was really honored. I went to Harvard, as you said, and I had a seminar with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr.
Wow.
Ooh. I know. I wish I could go back and take that class all over again.
Oh my God.
But I was in his seminar where we read literature about African-American women.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, it was great. And one of the most important things that I remember to this day is that he would teach us. He taught us authors that weren't themselves Black.
Oh,
and
wow.
some of the novels were not written by Black women. And he sort of would raise the fact that you don't have to be that race to make a book that is good literature, which is, I think, kind of particularly relevant these days. A lot of people sort of conflate the idea of you have to be from that race to write a certain character. And what he taught me was that you don't necessarily have to, but we do have to allow people who are less represented to tell their own stories, which is sort of the difference.
Yeah,
It's not that you can't. It's just like we have to make sure we're supporting the people who have less opportunities to tell those stories as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Okay. I would say Miss Coviello, middle school science.
Okay.
Yeah. She gave me a science award and I was not good at her class. I did not make A's.
Okay.
But I got really frustrated that like I didn't understand the concepts. And it was really meaningful because she rewarded the fact that I was like, that I really wanted to understand the concept, even if I wasn't like as successful, even if I didn't get an A, like that was something that she would reward as well.
That's
awesome. And then finally,
that's awesome.
Yeah, she was, that's an important lesson. And then I'd say finally, my Rabbi Sherman at Temple Israel in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, rabbis and teachers. Yeah. So a few months after my dad died, he invited me and my family for a Seder, which is a dinner where you celebrate the story of Passover and the Jews leaving slavery in Egypt. And so he told that story for us. And it was just so reassuring at the time to hear a story that we all knew so well in the middle of a year that felt really upside down and chaotic. And so Rabbi Sherman taught me how important it was to have that sort of ritual in your life, especially important in times of upheaval. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a 5, right?
That is 5. With Dr. Anand, that is 5. That's awesome. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know what you said will inspire others to share and reflect and to notice the people in their lives today. And that's the purpose of this show. And as they listen to the show, they'll learn and look for this teachable moments in their lives. And if there's you plugged your book, but if there's other projects you want to plug, and if people want to find you, they go to your website. Is there anything else you want to, anything else you want to plug about your story right now?
Oh, wow. Let me think. Well, I think especially I feel like Native young people really do have to grapple with figuring out their own identity when so many people have appropriated their story and told them who they are. So it's really difficult, I think, to really feel like you fit into that narrative. So I guess the only thing, what I want to plug is, everyone's got a really great story, and it doesn't have to be one that people expect from you. It can be, and that's going to be beautiful when there's like so many different Native stories that we understand, that there's a lot of diversity in our own community.
That's right.
And I want people to share that. I want to hear those stories. So
that's what I'm
going to plug.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for your spirit, your story. Yeah. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. And thank you for the message. Like we say at the end of the show, class dismissed. Emily, appreciate you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was great to see you.
Yeah. You got it. Yeah. The Whole Student Podcast has been brought to you by Duncast. Produced by J.D. Scroggin, the Director of Marketing and Communication at the Dunn School, and co-produced by Brandon Scott of Comfort Food. Thank you for joining us.